Hey there, thanks for watching today's Drawing for Adults class brought to you by the Ann Arbor District Library and the Ann Arbor Art Center. Today we are going to be drawing these lovely trees with pen and ink and watercolor. So the first thing that we want to do is just make a quick sketch on watercolor paper of your trees. So I'm kind of zooming in so that I don't have much of a background space, and I just want to keep it kind of simple. I've added a few branches. I'm going to add more branches as I add the ink on top later, but I want to zoom in so I'm not even drawing top to bottom of the tree. I just want to kind of keep this as something that's pretty loose and not overly detailed in a realistic way. So this is going to be a great opportunity for you to explore being a little bit more expressive with not only your mark making with the ink pens, but also with your watercolor paint. And once you're pretty satisfied with your sketch, you can go ahead in with your watercolor paints. And I would really recommend, again, loosening up with this and doing a wet on wet technique, which is a little bit challenging for me to really show you on here super well. So I'm gonna do the best that I can to explain it, even though I'm doing a digital version. But what you're gonna do is take a wet brush and just paint your paper in those negative spaces and the spaces around the trees. And then simply take your wet brush and dip it into the paint and apply it and let it just kind of bleed into any of those areas that's wet from your brush where you kind of painted it with just water. And so as you do that, you can just kind of pile in lots of different colors, just fill that space. If it bleeds into the tree a little bit in places, that's okay, don't worry about it. If it gets to be a lot, you can see that happens every once in a while. Just take a paper towel or a rag and dab over top of the tree, and that should lighten that up a bit so that you don't have that watercolor paint getting in places that you don't want it. But also at some point it's okay if you do decide to come back in, especially if the background is dry, and come back in with your watercolor paints and add a little bit of detail into the tree. So you can see here I'm adding a little bit of shadows to help create a sense of form within the trees, as well as just some texture there on the bark itself. So I'm not adding a ton of color. Now you're seeing this of course as a time-lapse video and a digital version, so I don't have to actually wait for this to dry. Whereas in reality, if I was doing this with actual watercolor paint on paper, I would be letting a lot of this dry. So this process that you've seen in the last minute and a half or so, I would say would probably actually be more like an hour and a half potentially between all of the dry time. Because otherwise, you know, if you mix yellow right into blue, it'll automatically make green, which I do have some green places, but you might not want all of it to mix right away, and you might want to let it dry in between layers rather than just doing it kind of all in one coat. So just consider that as you're painting. It's totally dependent. You can always go back and add more color, so don't feel like it's something you have to do right away. An important step with all of the watercolor painting that you're doing, whether it's in the background or within the trees, is to make sure that you don't oversaturate it with color. It's so easy with watercolor to get kind of paint happy, and then you end up just putting a little bit too much paint all over and not leaving enough white space. Arguably, when I look at this, I might have even done that myself. So, but that's okay. Luckily, the ink pen that we're using it's black, and so therefore it will help you to get a little bit of that extra contrast. If you did lose a lot of your white space, hopefully having that dark contrast with the black ink will help. So you can see here I'm coming in with a pretty loose ink pen, meaning that I am scribbling a little bit. I'm shaking my hand intentionally. I'm not worried about getting everything to be super precise and exact. Every once in a while, I have to admit, while I was doing this, I was doing that, and I was trying to get a little bit more detailed than I'd really like to get. So I caught myself having to remind myself, oh yeah, okay, it's fine to, you know, scribble a little bit, make some mistakes, make some sloppy little areas, and that's okay. That's a good thing. We want that because you want to have that added texture. You want it to feel kind of fun. Even if it feels like you're just adding scribbles, sometimes that can feel very juvenile at the time. It can feel very elementary looking, but it actually comes together in the end. I think that the scribbly places that I have, so here you can see I'm adding a little bit more because I realized I got a little too precise. I think those are some of my favorite little places. And you can also see here I'm adding in some smaller branches coming off of the main tree or the other little branches I have. So you can add other little details like that. And if you're using a pen such as a Pigma Micron pen that's waterproof, then you can also come back on top with watercolor paints. Like I said, if you did want to add a little bit more color, whether that's inside the tree or outside of the tree in the background, you can add more color without worrying about smearing or smudging or having your ink pen bleed. But if you're using just kind of, you know, some random ink pen that you have around the house that does not say waterproof, you could try to Google it and see what you can come up with. If maybe it is waterproof, but you do have to worry about your ink pens bleeding, which could have its own aesthetic, I suppose. But if that's not your intent for the piece, then I recommend being really, really careful. I would hate for you to spend all this time making a work of art and then accidentally have everything kind of smudge and bleed from going back with your watercolors. So just be kind of careful about the materials that you're using, but otherwise have fun with this. Just kind of really loosen up, practice what it's like to create an agitated line. Again, that just kind of means shaking your hand a little bit so that you're not being super precise, you're loosening up, you're letting it kind of free flow and just kind of happen. This is a really fun way. It's one of my favorite ways of sketching, especially nature, because you don't have to worry about getting everything exactly how it is, but instead getting the idea of what it appears to you and get the general impression of you know, whatever it is in nature. So I hope you've enjoyed today's lesson and create something beautiful.